It was the magnitude of football's success that was the significant factor in bringing it back in 1959. And working hand in hand with that effort was the newly created Bronco Bench Foundation. Football on its former scale was not practical, but playing it at a lower level and in an on-campus home stadium was doable. Through the efforts of Sal Sanfilippo and the Campeses, plus the legal help of Ed Pinelli, the Bronco Bench Foundation was established. Its original goal was to construct an on-campus stadium to provide a true home field for the resurrected football program and the well-established baseball team. The dream was realized in 1962 with the completion of Buck Shaw Stadium, a dual-purpose campus facility seating about 8,000 fans, but capable of cramming in 10,000. The Bronco Bench rapidly evolved over the next few years, positioning itself to supply the funds for 6 football athletic aid scholarships, beginning with the 1968 season. This marked the first time since Santa Clara resumed football that athletic aid scholarships were given. Thus, the Bronco Bench tradition of providing scholarships for Santa Clara student athletes was born. 60 years later, the Bronco Bench Foundation endowment has grown to $50 million, providing nearly 20 full scholarships annually for Bronco student athletes. For the Bronco Bench Foundation and to the many individuals in attendance today that have been so instrumental towards this long-standing effort of empowering student athletes at Santa Clara University, folks, let's all stand and give a huge round of applause to the Bronco Bench Foundation. With the arrival of former player and football alum, the legendary George Pat Malley, came a perfect meeting of opportunity and desire. Thus began what can rightly be called a love affair between Pat and his volunteer assistants, between a football environment and the students, between the sport and the surrounding community, and foremost of all, between Pat and his players. And it lasted for over a quarter of a century, the bond broken only by the curse of cancer. While construction of the new Buck Shaw Stadium was underway, Pat Malley went to work rebuilding the football program. He began by securing the help of Santa Clara's legendary trainer, Henry Schmidt, who would be a part of the team for decades. Next came the hiring of his assistant coaches, and the word hire is used in the loosest sense of the word. They were almost all volunteers, and some of these volunteers, like Ron Modesti and Don Bordenave, stayed for the duration, a great testimony to Pat Malley's leadership and character. In 1963, alum and friend, future UCLA and 49er assistant Bill McPherson joined the staff. Another volunteer coming on board at the beginning was John Pasco, the Broncos' Orange Bowl quarterback. He was particularly helpful in recruiting first Ron and then Ray Calcagno to SCU, and another tradition of outstanding quarterbacks was started at the outset. The Calcagno brothers laid the foundation for success on the field, complemented by a series of terrific receivers like Bob Chichi, Torney Orlandini, Cliff Gamble, and All-American Bart Jenks. Along with exceptional running backs like Mike Kellogg, Bo Rogers, Tom Kennedy, Gary Filzetti, and All-Americans Bob Miranda and Mike Doherty. As a sophomore in 1963, Miranda set a then team season rushing record of 1,005 yards and became the first Bronco running back to rush over 2,000 yards in a career. The defensive side was just as impressive, calling themselves the Gurkhas after the famous Indian fighters during the British Raj. The Broncos were led by players like John Guheen and All-American Mike Antonelli. These players, many of whom were star players on high school championship teams, along with the dedicated Bronco coaches, laid a solid foundation and got the program going, setting the tone for another era of football excellence over the next 25 years. In the fall of 1959, Pat put together a 5-game slate. Mirroring football's first foray 50 years earlier, various local military teams were featured: McClellan Air Force Base, Alameda Naval Air Station, and Treasure Island Naval Base. The following year, the number of games grew to 7 and even included a trip to San Quentin State Prison. By 1963, there were 9 games, and it was the last time a non-collegiate team, the Moffett Field Flyers, was included. Victories piled up, and for the remainder of the decade, the team went 46-18. The surge in wins was matched by the increase in school spirit and student body support. Homecoming weekend was huge, accompanied by floats and a parade through downtown Santa Clara. Yes, there was a real downtown then. And the heart of the campus, pep rallies and bonfires. In the 1965 season, more than 1,000 students traveled down US 101 for the game against UCSB, and in 1967, the attendance figure for the 5 home games totaled 37,320. The student body that year numbered about 2,100. The great majority of the students came to all the games, and so did the surrounding neighborhood community. During the 1960s, Pat produced 9 All-Americans, multiple All-Coast selections, and NFL player Mike Kellogg. Moreover, Pat donned the hat of athletic director in 1965 and continued serving in this dual role of AD and head coach for 20 more years. He was also selected as the Northern California College Coach of the Year 3 times, 1963, 1965, and 1967. During this 5-year stretch, the program only lost 9 total games, with only 1 loss each in the 1965 and 1967 seasons. The 1960s were a tremendous decade and a most auspicious start to the new Santa Clara football era.